Hi everybody, it's Lisa Van Groningen. Wanted to give just a quick tutorial on how to use these bias tape makers. But before I give you the actual demo or the tutorial for using the bias tape makers, I wanted to take the guesswork and the intimidation out of finding bias. And so I thought I'd quickly go through that with you. A lot of people are intimidated to use bias because they know it stretches, and when you're piecing, bias can be a bit of a challenge, but when you're appliquing, we can use that bias or that stretch to our advantage, especially if we're making stems or leaves or curlicues or anything like that. So let's learn how to do that. I have a piece of fabric here kind of as it comes off the bolt. We have the fold end here and we have the salvage end on the top. And then I have a little diagram here of the different grains of fabric. If we were cutting along either the fold or along our salvages, we would be cutting along the straight grain. So that would be this way, okay? Straight grain is great if you're making long borders and don't want to piece them, or if you're making long binding and don't want to piece it. That's where your straight grain really comes in handy. Most of us typically cut cross grain, which is from salvage to salvage. So we would be cutting this way as the fabric comes off the bolt. We'd be cutting salvage to salvage. Those lengths are about 42 to 44 inches. Cross grain has a little bit of stretch to it. I actually really like to use cross grain for my binding. It's super strong and it's got a little stretch to it. So even if my binding is a scalloped edge, as long as the scallops aren't super deep, cross grain binding works great. Cross grain strips also actually work for these bias tape makers. They're just not going to curve quite as much as strips that are cut along the bias. So let's talk about bias. Bias is basically a 45-degree cut off of fabric that comes off the bolt. And so most of our rulers have a 45-degree line on them that you can line up with your salvage edge and cut that 45 to get the bias angle, which is the true stretch. A lot of us, what we'll do is we'll just basically cut a square that comes off of our yardage. Just cut a square and cut that square in half diagonally. And that's what gives us the 45. And let me show you that here. So here I've cut, let me show it to you before I cut my square here. So here I have a square, right? And basically just making this cut from one corner to the other, I've now got the bias, okay? And so then when I cut off strips from this edge, this bias edge, that gives me the bias strip. Okay, hope that was helpful. Any questions, you can email me at my Facebook page, Kit and Caboodle Quilt Company. Otherwise, look for the next tutorial, and that will be for how to use these bias tape makers. Thanks so much.